Today, we're completely dismantling the Hollywood myths surrounding Japan's most legendary warriors. When we picture the great samurai, right, our minds usually go straight to that cinematic ideal. We picture cherry blossoms gently falling, rain pouring down, two stoic warriors facing off, swords plashing until their very last glorious breath. It's an absolutely epic image, but the truth is so much more fascinating, and honestly, a whole lot messier. We're going right past the movies today to look at the stark, the gritty, and often the deeply ironic realities of how these legendary figures actually met their end.
Okay, let's dive right into this by asking a pretty simple question, just to challenge your assumptions. Think of a man who fought dozens of lethal, life-or-death duels and never lost a single one, literally the deadliest swordsman in Japanese history. How do you think a man like that died? Did he fall in some massive chaotic battle against absolutely overwhelming odds? Was he betrayed in the dead of night by a jealous rival? Or was his fate entirely completely different? Keep that question burning in the back of your mind, because the answer totally flips the script on what we consider a traditional warrior's death.
To understand this evolution, we'll follow a quick roadmap today. We're going to cover defining the honorable death, the ironic ends of great warlords, being too exhausted to fight, how modernity kills the samurai, and finally, the way of walking alone.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Defining the Honorable Death. This is all about Minamoto no Yorimasa and the birth of a ritual.
So we begin all the way back in the year 1180 with a 74-year-old warrior named Minamoto no Yorimasa. Now, he's just faced total defeat at the Battle of Uji. His forces are broken, and he knows that enemy capture is utterly imminent. But Yorimasa decides to handle this impending doom in a massively historically significant way. Think about the incredible gravity of this moment for a second. You're 74 years old, the end is literally rushing towards you, and yet you remain completely composed. Yorimasa retreats to the quiet sanctuary of the Byodo-in temple. He sits down, takes out a simple paper fan, and with the enemy closing in, he takes a brush and actually composes a death poem reflecting on his life right there on the fan's surface. Only after that moment of profound calmness and artistry does he perform the violent, ritualistic abdominal cut with his sword. The contrast between the poetry and the violence here is just staggering, isn't it? By doing this, he codified a process. He established a baseline, the strict formal elements of an honorable death through seppuku that the entire samurai class would obsessively chase for the next 700 years.
Moving on to Section 2, Ironic Ends of Great Warlords. This is where we look at expectation versus the mundane reality.
Now, when we look at the absolute most feared warlords of the Sengoku period, we naturally expect them to die roaring on a battlefield, but the truth is darkly comedic and just remarkably human. Take Oda Nobunaga, the ruthless unifier of Japan who was right on the verge of total dominance. He wasn't killed by some glorious rival army. No, he was betrayed by his own general, cornered, and forced to commit seppuku inside a burning temple where his body was entirely reduced to ash just so no one could claim his head. Then there's Uesugi Kenshin, terrifyingly known as the Dragon of Echigo. Legend loves to say a ninja hid in his toilet cesspit and speared him from below. But the remarkably mundane truth is that he likely just suffered a fatal stroke right there in the lavatory. The great dragon, felled by a bathroom emergency. Takeda Shingen, the formidable military genius, didn't fall in combat either. He died of a sudden, quiet illness, and his clan was so desperate they actually used body doubles, kagemusha, to secretly hide his death for 3 full years. And, okay, my absolute favorite, Ishida Mitsunari, the leader of the Western Coalition. Right before his public beheading, a guard offered him a dried persimmon as a final snack. He actually refused it. With literal seconds left to live, he told the stunned crowd the persimmons were bad for digestion. He's about to lose his head, yet he's still hyper-obsessed with his digestive health. You just can't make this stuff up.
This cruel irony is really highlighted perfectly by Oda Nobunaga's betrayer, Akachi Mitsuhide. Mitsuhide ruled for just 13 days before his own swift defeat. Now, while fleeing for his life, he was wearing this incredibly expensive, heavy, shimmering golden armor. The whole point of this gold was to project immense power, to mark him as a high-ranking, godlike warrior. Instead, that shimmering gold essentially acted as a giant illuminated bullseye. Local farmers, literally just regular, everyday peasants, saw the gold, immediately realized how valuable his gear was, and ambushed him. And they didn't use legendary katanas either. They used cheap, crude, improvised bamboo spears. The man who successfully overthrew Japan's greatest warlord wasn't bested by another master tactician. He was forced into seppuku by farmers wielding sharpened bamboo just looking for a quick payday. It's a perfect microcosm of how chaotic and totally unromantic this era truly was.
Okay, Section 3,
Too exhausted to fight. Here we examine the tragic limits of the warrior spirit. Let's jump ahead a bit to 1615 and see how this builds with Sanada Yukimura at the devastating summer siege of Osaka. Yukimura was renowned across the land as the Crimson Demon, easily recognized by his terrifying blood-red armor. During this battle, he led a desperate, completely fearless charge, plunging straight into the enemy lines. He broke through multiple defensive walls and came closer to killing the future shogun than literally anyone else in history. But here's where the legend crashes headfirst in the biology. Even a godlike warrior has profound human limits, right? The adrenaline eventually wears off. After hours of constant, brutal hand-to-hand combat, Yukimura's body completely and totally failed him. He retreated to the quiet grounds of Yasui Shrine, took off his heavy helmet, and simply sat down heavily against a tree. He was physically unable to even lift his arms anymore.
When enemy soldiers eventually crept up and found the terrifying Crimson Demon resting there, he made absolutely no attempt to fight. He made no attempt to flee. He simply looked up and delivered a line of pure, profound acceptance. "I am Sanada Yukimura. Take my head." He was killed right where he sat. It wasn't some epic clash of steel. It was a moment of sheer, total physical exhaustion. A warrior who had absolutely nothing left to give physically, yet retained every ounce of his absolute dignity at the very end.
Which brings us to Section 4, Modernity Kills the Samurai, the inevitable fall to advanced weaponry.
Fast forward to the late 19th century, and the era of the samurai meets the incredibly harsh, unyielding reality of industrialization. Warfare shifted completely away from the honorable, face-to-face sword fights of the past. It started in 1868, when the Tokugawa shogunate finally fell, plunging Japan into civil war and rapid modernization. Just a year later, in June of 1869, Hijikata Tojizo, a man famous for wielding both a traditional katana and a modern firearm, led a desperate cavalry charge at Hakodate. But there was no dramatic duel for him. He was unceremoniously shot in the lower back by a modern rifle. And then, by September of 1877, we arrive at the devastating Battle of Shiroyama. Here, Saigo Takamori's few hundred remaining traditional samurai, armed largely with swords and spears, charged into a literally overwhelming modern force. They weren't facing fellow swordsmen. They faced 30,000 conscripted soldiers armed with repeating rifles and heavy artillery. The honor of the sword was completely erased by the brutal math of the machine gun.
The sheer tragedy of this shift is completely encapsulated in Saigo Takamori's final moments. Known to history as the Last Samurai, Saigo was struck in the hip by a bullet during that final desperate charge. Now think back to Section 1 for a second. Remember Minamoto no Yorimasa? Calmly sitting in a quiet temple, writing poetry, executing a perfectly controlled, strict, formal ritual. Saigo's reality was the exact opposite. Because his hip was shattered by modern lead, he couldn't even stand, let alone maintain the traditional, deeply respectful kneeling position required for seppuku. Amidst the blood and the chaotic noise of artillery fire, he had to have his loyal lieutenant physically hold his body upright just so he could barely attempt the abdominal cut before being hastily beheaded. The very last holdout of the samurai spirit wasn't just defeated, he was denied his perfectly honorable death, abruptly cut down by the impersonal, chaotic firepower of the exact modernization he had initially helped create.
Finally, Section 5, The Way of Walking Alone, the ultimate subversion of expectations.
We return now to the man from our opening question, Miyamoto Musashi. 61. That is the staggering number of lethal life-or-death duels Musashi fought and won. He never lost a single one. He cemented his status as the absolute most feared and deadly swordsman in all of Japan, developing a revolutionary, aggressive two-sword fighting technique. You look at a resume completely drenched in blood like that, and you fully expect a man like this to die violently, right? I mean, you expect some kind of bloody final stand.
Yet his end was wonderfully, almost shockingly ordinary. By 1645, a 61-year-old Musashi had retired from dueling entirely. He chose to live as a solitary hermit in the quiet, damp isolation of Reigando Cave. He didn't dedicate his final years to warfare or plotting conquests. Instead, he dedicated them to philosophy, delicate ink painting, and writing. He eventually developed terminal thoracic cancer, a condition that caused him incredibly severe chest pain and agonizing difficulty breathing. But rather than seeking comfort, medical treatment, or returning to civilization, he chose absolute solitude. Just contrast those 61 violent, screaming, bloody duels with the quiet scratching of a writing brush. In his final weeks, fighting immense pain, he sat at a small wooden desk by candlelight, distilling his entire martial experience into the Dokudo, or the way of walking alone, 21 brilliant precepts for an independent, disciplined life.
On June 13th, he died peacefully, kneeling quietly at his desk. He succumbed to natural causes, holding a delicate writing brush instead of a steel sword, keeping his perfect, undefeated battle record entirely intact.
I want to leave you with a provocative thought about Musashi and all the incredible figures we've explored today. After looking at warlords who burned to ash, warriors who died of sheer exhaustion leaning against trees, and heroes cut down in the mud by modern gunfire, consider Musashi's profoundly quiet end. Does stepping away from the violence, to die quietly in a cave with a pen in hand, elevate a martial legacy, or does it rewrite what it means to be a warrior entirely? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring the true, striking realities of Japan's greatest warriors with me today.